Will young Indonesians ever own a home? Imagine being in your late 20s, you have a decent job, you work hard, you've done everything you were told to do, and yet owning a home still feels impossibly far away. Because every year, prices seem to rise, the apartment gets smaller, and the houses you can actually afford seem to move further and further away from the city. Meanwhile, your parents tell you that by your age, they were already married, already raising children, already paying off a home, which raises an uncomfortable question. Did young Indonesians become less ambitious? Or has the dream itself become harder to achieve? Because for decades, owning a home wasn't just about property. It was a milestone, a symbol of stability, a sign that you had made it. But today, an increasing number of young Indonesians are asking a question their parents rarely had to ask. Will we ever own a home? For generations, owning a home represented something bigger than bricks and concrete. It meant security, independence, success, a place to raise a family. And historically, many Indonesians were able to achieve that dream. Land was cheaper, cities were smaller, competition was lower. And as Indonesia's economy expanded, millions entered the middle class. Home ownership became part of the promise of economic progress. Over time, something changed. To understand the frustration many young Indonesians feel today, we first need to understand one simple fact. Income and house prices haven't moved at the same speed, and housing experts have a way of measuring that. It's called the price-to-income ratio. In simple terms, how many years of income does it take to buy a home? A ratio above 5 is generally considered unaffordable. In Indonesia, that number is estimated to be close to 14, one of the highest in Asia. Meaning the challenge isn't simply finding a house, it's being able to afford one. Ask many Indonesians who bought homes in the 80s or 90s, and you'll often hear the same story. Buying a home felt difficult, but not impossible. Today, many young Indonesians feel that the gap between incomes and house prices has become much larger, and the data appears to support that feeling. Nowhere is this challenge more visible than in Jakarta. Because for many young professionals, the choice is no longer between renting and buying. It's between living near work or owning a house 2 hours away. As land prices rise in city centers, developers build farther and farther from where the jobs are, which means owning a home often comes with a hidden cost: time. Suddenly, the dream of owning a house may also mean spending 3 or 4 hours a day commuting, or settling for a much smaller apartment, or postponing the dream altogether. And perhaps the most frustrating part is that none of those options feel ideal. The surprising part is this: Indonesia isn't alone. Young Canadians complain about housing, Australians complain about housing, South Koreans complain about housing, Americans complain about housing, which raises an interesting question. If the world is becoming richer, why does home ownership seem to feel further away? Because the problem may not actually be houses, it's cities. As economies grow, jobs become concentrated, opportunities become concentrated, and people naturally move toward those places because everyone wants to live where the opportunities are, but land is finite. And that's where the paradox begins. The very cities that create the most opportunities often become the hardest places to afford, which means this isn't just Jakarta's story. It's a story being played out across the world. Most people assume Indonesia simply doesn't have enough houses, but that's only part of the story. The real issue is affordability, because building more homes doesn't automatically make them affordable. Young Indonesians face challenges that go far beyond property prices: rising living costs, transportation expenses, down payment requirements, and wages that often struggle to keep up. In other words, the problem isn't just buying a home, it's building a life. And this challenge comes at a particularly difficult moment because Indonesia's middle class, the very group traditionally responsible for driving home ownership, has actually been shrinking from more than 57 million people in 2019 to less than 48 million in 2024, which means millions of Indonesians are finding it harder to maintain the lifestyle previous generations once considered normal, which helps explain why previous generations often worried about whether they could buy a house. Today's generation increasingly worries whether they'll ever be able to buy one at all. The bigger question is this: do young Indonesians still dream of owning homes? Of course they do. The real question is whether the path itself has changed. Marriage gets delayed, children come later, and many young adults remain with their parents longer. Not because they lack ambition, but because the math no longer works. And that's a real story. Not that home ownership has become impossible, but that the timeline has changed. Because dreams evolve, cities evolve, and economies evolve. After all, every generation inherits a different version of the same dream. So, will young Indonesians ever own a home? Probably. Many will, just as previous generations did, but not necessarily at the same age, or in the same place, or in the same way their parents did. Because the dream of home ownership isn't disappearing, it's evolving. And that's a challenge Indonesia will have to answer in the years ahead. Not whether young people still dream of owning homes. They do. The real question is whether the economy can keep that dream within reach. Because in the end, a country's future isn't measured by how many skyscrapers it builds. It's measured by whether ordinary people can still imagine a better life than their parents had. Every generation hopes to inherit that promise.